What would you do if, on the most important day of your child's life, you were treated as though you didn't matter? That was the thought swirling in Laura's head as she stood at the back of the grand hall, feeling like a ghost at her son's wedding. The air was thick with joy, excitement, and the kind of elegance that comes with an event of this magnitude. Yet, Laura felt none of it. Instead, she felt small, invisible, and entirely out of place. As the guests milled about, the music played softly in the background, and her son, Ethan, was front and center, radiant in his tuxedo. His smile was wide, and his eyes sparkled with excitement. He was marrying Rachel, the woman he had chosen to spend his life with, and today was supposed to be the culmination of their love story. Yet, as Laura watched from the sidelines, she couldn't shake the gnawing sense that something had gone terribly wrong. For years, Laura had been Ethan's rock. She had raised him on her own after the divorce from his father, pouring everything she had into making sure he never felt alone. She had sacrificed dreams, sleep, and sometimes even her own happiness to ensure he had a chance to chase his own. And now, here she was pushed to the background, her presence barely acknowledged. The thought of it felt like a punch to the gut. She watched Ethan laugh with his friends, his arms around his bride-to-be, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match the excitement of the day. It was almost as if, for a brief second, he didn't even notice her standing there, lost in the crowd of strangers and distant relatives. Was this it? Was this the moment when everything had changed? "Mom, are you okay?" The voice of Sarah, Laura's best friend and the maid of honor, broke through her spiraling thoughts. Sarah had known her longer than anyone, and her presence was a small comfort in this sea of unfamiliar faces. "I'm fine," Laura said, her voice betraying her uncertainty. "Just taking it all in." Sarah gave her a concerned look. "You don't look fine. You've been standing here for over an hour. Don't you want to mingle? Talk to some people?" Laura shook her head, forcing a smile. "It's not my day, is it? I'm just giving them their space." The words felt hollow the moment they left her lips. This wasn't just about giving space. It was about being sidelined, pushed into the background, left to watch as the most important day of her son's life unfolded without her. As Sarah walked off to join the others, Laura's mind drifted back to that moment, one of many, when she realized her role in Ethan's life was beginning to shift. Ethan had always been her world, her reason for getting up every day, no matter how hard things got. But lately, since he started dating Rachel, there had been subtle shifts in their relationship. It wasn't that Ethan had become distant, it was more that he was becoming part of something else. And that something else was becoming bigger than her. Laura had tried to tell herself it was just part of him growing up. After all, that's what parents are supposed to want for their children, for them to grow, to become independent, to form their own relationships. But a part of her, the part that had spent years nurturing him, felt like she was being erased. At first, it was little things. Ethan spending more time with Rachel than with her. The way he began prioritizing her family's traditions over their own. And now, on the day of his wedding, she was practically invisible. It was as though, in the blink of an eye, she had become a background character in a story she had once been the star of. Laura watched as the guests took their seats, everyone chattering excitedly about the ceremony. The reception hall was a masterpiece, white and gold decorations, crystal chandeliers that sparkled in the soft lighting, tables laden with fine china and delicate florals. Yet it all felt like a dream she wasn't allowed to be a part of. As the wedding party began to line up, Rachel passed by, looking stunning in her bridal gown, her smile bright, her eyes only for Ethan. Laura could feel the tension rising in her chest, her pulse quickening. Was this how it was supposed to be? The mother of the groom, relegated to the sidelines, watching as the woman who had only been in Ethan's life for a few years took center stage. "Are you sure you're okay?" Sarah asked, appearing by her side once again, her voice filled with genuine concern. "I'm fine," Laura repeated, though the words were thin and unconvincing. "I'll be okay. It's hard to watch, you know." "I get it," Sarah said softly, giving her a reassuring pat on the arm. "But don't forget, this is his day. And it doesn't mean he doesn't love you. He's just trying to figure out where he belongs in all of this." Laura nodded, though a part of her wasn't sure she believed it. Ethan had always been her priority. But now it felt like he was slipping away, like she was losing him to a world she wasn't a part of. The sound of the wedding march began to play, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Laura took a deep breath, plastering a smile on her face. She could do this. She had to. As the bride and groom took their places, Laura stayed in her corner, barely a shadow among the throngs of people who had come to celebrate the new couple. She forced herself to look away from Ethan, from Rachel, and from the moment that was slowly chipping away at the small piece of her heart that still felt like a mother. She told herself that everything would be fine, that this was just a phase, that she would find her place again someday. But for now, she couldn't shake the one question that lingered in her mind. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Laura's fingers traced the rim of her champagne flute, the glass cool against her skin. The wedding reception was in full swing, but she was barely aware of the buzz of conversation around her. She wasn't interested in the food, the laughter, or the toasts. All she could focus on was the overwhelming sense of loss that had begun to settle in her chest. As she watched Ethan and Rachel twirl around the dance floor, her mind drifted back to a time when things were simpler, when it was just the two of them against the world. Ethan had been a miracle. At least that's how she saw it. She had been only 22 when she found out she was pregnant with him, unplanned and unexpected. His father had left the moment he found out, disappearing without a trace, leaving Laura to navigate motherhood on her own. At the time, she'd been devastated. The dreams she had for herself, the aspirations she'd once clung to, seemed impossible now. But then she saw the little life growing inside her, and everything changed. She remembered the quiet nights rocking him to sleep, his tiny hand curled around her finger. She remembered the countless hours spent reading stories, patching scraped knees, and calming him after nightmares. She had poured every ounce of love and energy into raising him, determined to make sure he would never feel the absence of a father. Every birthday, every school play, every parent-teacher conference, she was there. She was always there. But now, standing in this grand ballroom, she couldn't help but feel like she was no longer needed. Rachel had taken her place. The familiar pang of jealousy gnawed at her, but it wasn't just jealousy. It was confusion, too. Confusion about how she had gone from being the center of Ethan's world to this woman on the outside looking in. "Mom, you're not dancing?" The voice cut through her thoughts like a knife. It was Ethan, standing next to her, a warm smile on his face, his hand outstretched. The smile she forced was tight. "No, sweetheart, I'm just fine watching." He looked a little disappointed, but quickly recovered. "Well, if you change your mind." His eyes flicked briefly to Rachel, who was talking animatedly with a group of her friends across the room. Then he turned back to Laura, his voice lowering. "I'm glad you're here, Mom." "Really?" Her heart twisted at his words, at the sincerity she could hear in his voice. But as the words left his mouth, something inside her flared with frustration. Was that all she was to him now? A presence to check off the list? "I'm glad to be here too, Ethan," Laura said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's your special day." He gave her a quick hug, then turned away to join Rachel on the dance floor, their movements in sync, an unspoken bond between them that Laura could only watch from afar. It was as if the world had shifted, and she was no longer the central figure in her own son's life. And somehow it felt as though Rachel had taken up that mantle without even asking. Laura took a deep breath, willing herself not to cry. She wasn't going to cry here, not now. Not on his wedding day. Her thoughts spiraled, and she found herself lost in memories of the years when she and Ethan were inseparable. She remembered when he had first learned to ride a bike. It had been a summer evening, the sun hanging low in the sky. Ethan had been nervous, his hands shaking as he held onto the handlebars, but Laura had been right behind him, ready to catch him if he fell. And when he finally pedaled away on his own, his face lit up with that pure, unfiltered joy. The same joy that had filled her heart in that moment. She had been there for every milestone. His first day of kindergarten. His first basketball game. The night he came home after his first heartbreak, sitting in her lap and crying like a little boy again, even though he was a teenager now. But those days felt so far away now. It wasn't just Rachel who had changed things. It was time. Ethan had grown up, and with that growth had come a shift in his loyalties. His life had expanded beyond hers, and she was now just a small piece of his larger picture. Rachel was the woman who would be with him for the rest of his life, and that reality was something Laura had not been prepared for. "Excuse me, Mrs. Hall?" Laura turned to see one of the wedding planners, a young woman with a clipboard, standing beside her. She hadn't even noticed the planner approach. "Yes, we need you for the family photos," the woman said with a smile, oblivious to the tension in the air. "Could you please come with me?" A cold knot formed in Laura's stomach. She was being asked to join the family photos, but something about it felt wrong. The family photos. Whose family was she even a part of anymore? "Of course," Laura said, though the words barely felt like they belonged to her. She followed the planner, her steps slow, deliberate. The whole room felt distant, as if she were walking through someone else's life. As she walked down the hall toward the outdoor area where the photos were being taken, she caught sight of Rachel's family, clustered together, laughing and chatting, their presence loud and welcoming. They had their own inside jokes, their own history. And Laura felt, once again, like an outsider in the very family she had once imagined would be hers. When she reached the area for the photos, Ethan was waiting, his smile still wide, but there was something in his eyes that made Laura feel both included and excluded at the same time. He pulled her into the frame, but it was like she was a ghost there, merely filling a space, not truly a part of the moment. As the photographer snapped photos, Laura caught herself staring at her son. She didn't recognize him anymore. This was no longer the boy she had raised. This was a man, his own life unfolding before him, with Rachel now standing at the center of it. She could feel the distance between them, a chasm that had slowly been growing over the years, widening now that this day had come. When the photo session ended, Ethan leaned in to kiss her cheek. "Thanks for being here, Mom. You mean everything to me." The words felt both comforting and painful. She smiled back at him, but inside, she felt the familiar ache of loss. The love she had for him was undeniable, but it was as if she was losing him in real time, right in front of her eyes. As she stepped away from the group, her thoughts became a swirl of confusion and hurt. Had she truly prepared herself for this moment? For the day when she would no longer be the most important woman in Ethan's life? And more importantly, could she ever truly accept it? The night wore on, the festivities carrying on without pause, but for Laura, time seemed to move in a blur. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft melodies of the live band, all of it faded into the background, becoming a mere hum as she retreated into her thoughts. She had always imagined this day differently. Ethan's wedding day should have been a moment of celebration, an occasion when she could beam with pride as a mother, knowing that the little boy she had raised with so much love and sacrifice was stepping into a new chapter of his life. But instead, it felt like a quiet goodbye, a moment when the distance between them was no longer a distant possibility, but a present reality. She watched as Ethan danced with Rachel, his hand resting comfortably on her waist, while Rachel leaned into him, whispering something in his ear. Their connection was so palpable, so intense, that Laura almost felt like an intruder watching their intimate moment. But it wasn't just Rachel. It was the whole day, the entire event that felt like it had nothing to do with her anymore. "Mom, can I get you a drink?" Sarah's voice pulled Laura from her reverie, and she blinked, taking in the sight of her best friend standing by her side with a sympathetic smile. Laura forced a smile, trying to push the nagging feeling of discomfort down. "I'm fine, Sarah. Thank you." But Sarah didn't buy it. She reached over and gently took the glass from Laura's hand, setting it down on the nearby table. "I think you've had enough of that," she said quietly, her voice soft but insistent. "You're too quiet. You've barely said anything all night." Laura's gaze flitted back to Ethan and Rachel, who were still lost in their world, a world Laura felt excluded from. She had once been the person Ethan turned to for everything, the person he sought out when he needed advice, comfort, or simply someone to share a laugh with. But now it felt as though he was slipping further and further from her grasp with every passing moment. Laura began, her voice trembling, but she stopped herself, not wanting to go any further. She wasn't sure how to express what she was feeling. How could she? How could she explain that her son, the child she had given everything to, was now a stranger to her? "Do you ever feel like you're losing someone?" Laura finally asked, her eyes still focused on the couple on the dance floor. Sarah's expression softened, and she sat down beside her. "You mean Ethan?" Laura nodded, feeling the weight of the words on her tongue. "He's not the same anymore, Sarah. It's like I don't know him." "Oh, Laura." Sarah sighed, placing a comforting hand on her friend's arm. "I know it's hard. Watching your child grow up is never easy, but you have to remember that this is a good thing. Ethan's moving forward. He's finding his own way in the world." Laura shook her head, her chest tight. "It's not just that, Sarah. I don't mind him growing up. I want that. But it's like I've been replaced. It's like Rachel has stepped into my place in his life, and I've been left behind." "I don't think that's it, Laura," Sarah said gently. "Ethan still loves you. He's just learning how to balance his life with Rachel and all the people who have been part of his journey. He's growing up. He's forming his own family now." Laura felt a pang at Sarah's words. "But where do I fit into all of this? Where am I supposed to be in his new life?" "You're his mother," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "That'll never change. No one can take your place." The words, though comforting, didn't ease the ache in Laura's heart. She was his mother, yes, but she wasn't sure what that role meant anymore. She had always imagined that her place in his life would be permanent, that there would always be a space for her. But as she looked around the room, all she saw was Rachel's family, their easy smiles and laughter, as though they had been there all along, while Laura had become a distant memory. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah's voice cut through the silence. "Anything," Laura replied, glancing at her friend. "Why do you think you feel like this? Like you're losing him? Isn't this what you wanted for him? His happiness? His future?" Laura's throat tightened. "Of course, I wanted that for him. I still do. But I didn't expect to feel pushed aside. I didn't expect to be invisible at his wedding. I didn't expect to feel like I wasn't a part of his future anymore." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her words quiet but full of understanding. "I think you're scared, Laura. You're scared of what comes next. It's not just Ethan growing up, it's you letting go of him. Letting go of the part of him that will always need you. But that doesn't mean you're losing him. You're just entering a new phase of your relationship with him. One where you aren't the center of his world anymore. And that's okay. It's normal. He's not leaving you behind, he's just moving forward." Laura looked at Sarah, her best friend, the one person who had always been there for her, and felt the heaviness in her chest. Could Sarah be right? Was this just a natural part of the process? Was she really just scared of what it meant to let go? She watched Ethan and Rachel again. They were laughing now, spinning in each other's arms, completely absorbed in one another. There was a joy in Ethan's face that Laura couldn't deny. This was his moment, his future. But where did that leave her? She let out a long breath, standing up from the table. I don't know, Sarah. I really don't know if I can do this. Sarah stood with her, giving her a tight hug. You'll figure it out, Laura. You always do. But as they joined the others for the final moments of the evening, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted irreparably. Ethan's life was no longer the one she had dreamed of for him, and she wasn't sure if she could find her place in it anymore. The night stretched on, the soft hum of music blending with the chatter of wedding guests as the ballroom's lights began to dim. The reception was winding down, but Laura felt no sense of closure. The champagne had long since lost its sweetness, and the dance floor had emptied, save for a few stragglers still clinging to the last notes of the band's final song. Ethan had long since disappeared with Rachel, most likely off to enjoy their private time. She had expected it, of course. This was their night. But as she watched the last of the guests filter out of the room, she felt like a shadow in her own life. A lingering presence, waiting for something that she couldn't quite name. Sarah had gone home hours ago, leaving her alone in the quiet aftermath. Laura wandered to a quiet corner, seeking solace in the solitude. Her fingers danced over her phone screen, scrolling aimlessly through messages she didn't know how to reply to, friends and family congratulating her on being part of such a special day. She hadn't responded to any of them. The words felt hollow in her mouth. Proud mother, what a beautiful day, congratulations to your son and daughter-in-law. None of it seemed real. How could she feel proud when she couldn't even recognize the person her son had become? How could she congratulate him when it felt like he was slipping away from her, little by little, every time he looked at Rachel the way he used to look at her? Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she startled, glancing down. It was a text from Ethan. Ethan, hey Mom. I'm really glad you were here tonight. I hope you had a good time. I'll call you tomorrow. Love you. Her chest tightened as she read the message. It wasn't that he hadn't tried. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was just so impersonal. Like he was checking a box, fulfilling an obligation. She had wanted more. She had needed more. The ping of her phone broke her out of her thoughts, and for a brief moment, she wondered if Ethan had texted again. But when she checked, it was a message from her ex-husband, Mark, the man who had disappeared the moment she had told him she was pregnant. Mark, I saw Ethan's wedding photos. Looks like a beautiful day. Hope you're doing okay. Take care. A hollow laugh escaped her lips. Mark, the man who had promised to be there for her, who had promised to help raise Ethan but had vanished when things got tough. Now he was sending her a message after years of silence, after never once showing up for Ethan or for her. The man who hadn't been there for a single milestone in their son's life. The bitterness was sharp, a reminder of the wounds she had buried for so long. Mark had no right to contact her. He had no right to comment on Ethan's life, to pretend like he cared. But then, just as quickly, the anger gave way to something deeper, a sorrow, an aching sadness for the life they could have had. Why had he left her? Why hadn't he fought for their family? Laura's thoughts were interrupted by a soft noise behind her. She turned quickly, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Ethan. He was standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching her, his posture tense but uncertain. His eyes met hers, and for the first time that evening, she saw something genuine in his gaze. Something that resembled the boy he used to be. Mom, he said softly, taking a tentative step toward her. Her heart lurched in her chest. Ethan, she whispered, a mixture of relief and frustration flooding her. What are you doing here? You should be with Rachel. I needed to talk to you, he said, glancing nervously around the empty room before meeting her eyes again. I didn't want the night to end without talking to you. Her breath hitched, and she blinked back tears. I'm here, Ethan. What is it? He hesitated before walking toward her, his steps slow and measured. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you. About us." Laura felt a mixture of hope and anxiety rush through her. Had he noticed it too? The space between them, the distance that seemed to grow every time they spoke? "I know it's been hard," he continued, standing beside her now. "I know things have changed, and I know it's not easy for you to see me change." He paused, a look of guilt crossing his face. "But I don't want you to think that you don't matter. You do. You always will." Laura wanted to speak, to tell him everything she had been feeling, to explain how lost she had felt watching him become a man without her. But the words were stuck in her throat, tangled and twisted, impossible to say. Instead, she nodded, her voice a whisper. "I just don't know where I fit anymore, Ethan." He looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I don't know how to explain it," she said, feeling a lump form in her throat. "You've changed. You're not the boy I used to know. And I'm not the person you turn to anymore. You've got Rachel now." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise, and he stepped closer, his expression earnest. "Mom, it's not like that. I still need you. I always will." He looked down at his hands for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "I know I haven't been the best son. I know I've been distant. But that's on me, not you." Laura swallowed hard. I can't help but feel like I've been replaced." Ethan's face softened, and he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You haven't been replaced. I could never replace you. Mom, you're irreplaceable. You're the one who raised me. You're the one who's always been there. Rachel and I are building our future together, but that doesn't mean I don't still need you in my life." For a moment, Laura just stood there, letting his words settle over her. There was a comfort in hearing him say it, but the gnawing fear remained. Could she really accept the new version of their relationship? "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You won't," he said firmly, his grip tightening on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out, Mom. Together." For the first time that evening, Laura felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. But as the night ended and the last of the guests trickled out, Laura couldn't shake the nagging feeling that things would never be the same. No, they wouldn't. But perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something new. Something that didn't erase the past, but built on it. As she watched Ethan walk away, her heart swelled with both love and fear. The future was uncertain, but for the first time tonight, she felt like she had a small place in it. The days following the wedding passed in a blur. The initial tension between Laura and Ethan had softened, but the underlying uncertainty still lingered. While the emotional connection between them had been reaffirmed that night, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something profound, something that both terrified and exhilarated her. The morning after the wedding, Ethan had called her to check in, a simple, "Hey, Mom, how are you?" That was warm but distant, like a crack in the ice that she wasn't sure would hold. It wasn't that he was cold or uninterested, but she could feel the shift, the space between them that had grown over the years. There was no denying it anymore. He was living his life, making his decisions, building his future, and she was just a part of the past. That afternoon, Laura found herself walking through the old neighborhood, her feet taking her to places that had once been familiar but now felt strangely alien. She passed the old high school, where she had driven Ethan to class every day, where they had argued over curfews and laughed over shared secrets. It had been the center of their world for so long, and yet now, as she stood there in the quiet of the afternoon, she realized how much had changed. Ethan's childhood home was still there, the one they had lived in before the divorce, the one she had worked so hard to create a home in. It was now occupied by strangers who had no idea what that house had meant to her, to Ethan. The thought sent a wave of sadness washing over her, but she swallowed it, forcing herself to keep walking. She didn't know what she was looking for anymore. Maybe it was a sign, a clue about where she fit in this new chapter of her life. Ethan was gone, living his own life, and Mark had disappeared long ago, leaving nothing but an empty space where a family should have been. The quiet of the neighborhood was almost suffocating, the absence of children's laughter, the stillness of the homes, a stark reminder that so much had changed. And that change was something Laura hadn't been ready for. As she turned the corner onto her street, she caught sight of Sarah walking toward her, her face lit up by a smile that was both genuine and knowing. "Hey," Sarah called, waving her hand as she approached. "How are you?" Laura didn't know how to answer. How is she? How could she possibly explain the mess of emotions swirling inside her, the conflicting feelings of pride for her son and sorrow for the loss she felt? The fear of being left behind and the quiet hope that maybe things could still be okay. "I don't know," Laura admitted, the words feeling like a weight in her chest. "I think I'm still trying to figure it out." Sarah nodded, her expression softening with understanding. "It's a big change, Laura. And change is hard, especially when it feels like you're losing something you've had for so long. But it's not about losing him. It's about evolving. You're not losing Ethan. You're just shifting into a new role." "But I don't know how to shift," Laura said, the frustration seeping into her voice. "It feels like he's moved on. Like Rachel is taking over, and I don't even know where I fit anymore. I can't just let go." "You don't have to let go completely," Sarah said, gently nudging Laura's shoulder as they walked together. "It's just about finding new ways to be in each other's lives." "Relationships evolve, Laura. The way you're thinking about it, like it's all or nothing, isn't going to help. Ethan isn't going anywhere. He just has a new path now and you're part of it, but in a different way." Laura paused, glancing at Sarah. "But what if I don't know how to be that person for him anymore? What if I'm not enough?" "You are enough," Sarah said firmly, her voice calm but unwavering. "You'll always be enough. But you can't keep holding on to the idea of who you were in his life. You have to accept that who you are now is just as important. It's about letting go of the fear of losing him. You have to trust that Ethan will always need you, even if it's not the way it was before." Laura let the words settle in her mind. She had been so focused on the fear of change that she hadn't allowed herself to see the possibility that Ethan's future wasn't a reflection of her absence, but an extension of his own growth. She had been looking at it all wrong. It wasn't about what she had lost. It was about what they both had gained. "Maybe you're right," Laura murmured, more to herself than to Sarah. "Maybe I'm just afraid of being forgotten." "You won't be," Sarah said with a soft smile. "You'll just be a different kind of presence in his life, one that's equally valuable. You don't have to fight for his attention or try to hold on to what was. You just have to be there when he needs you, as his mother. And trust me, he will." The words had a comforting weight to them, a reassurance that Laura hadn't known she needed. She had been so caught up in the fear of being displaced, of being left behind, that she hadn't considered the possibility that Ethan could still need her in ways that were different, but equally significant. When they reached Laura's house, she felt lighter somehow, like the tension in her chest had eased, even if just a little. "Thanks, Sarah. I needed to hear that," she said, her voice softer than it had been all day. "No problem," Sarah replied with a wink. "That's what friends are for. And remember, I'm always here. We'll figure this out together." As Sarah walked away, Laura stood on her front porch, staring out at the familiar street. She thought of Ethan again, of the wedding, of their conversation. The fear wasn't gone, but it wasn't the only thing she felt anymore. There was room now for something else, hope, a sense of possibility. Maybe she didn't need to hold on so tightly to the past. Maybe she could step into this new chapter, this new role. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be the same, but it was still hers. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The following week passed in a haze of quiet introspection. Laura found herself spending more time alone, reflecting on the conversations with Sarah and Ethan, and wrestling with the idea of embracing a new chapter. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had any clear answers, only a series of questions about where she fit into this unfamiliar reality. She had always defined herself by her role as a mother. Raising Ethan, seeing him grow into the man he was today, had been her life's work. But as she faced the reality of his marriage, his life with Rachel, and his gradual shift toward adulthood, she couldn't help but feel a void in the space where she used to stand. Her identity as a mother was still intact, but it no longer held the same meaning it once had. What did it mean to be a mother when your child no longer needed you in the same way? To her surprise, it was a phone call from Ethan that pulled her from her reverie. He'd promised he would check in after the wedding, but she had started to doubt whether that was going to happen. It had been a few days since their conversation at the reception, and she had told herself that if he didn't reach out, she wouldn't push him. But here he was. Her heart skipped as she picked up the phone. "Hey, Mom." Ethan's voice was warm, familiar. "How are you?" "I'm good," Laura said, trying to keep her voice steady. "How about you?" "I'm good, just settling into married life," he chuckled softly. "It's been a lot of changes, you know?" Laura smiled, a bittersweet feeling creeping up her chest. She was happy for him. Really, she was. But the truth was, the changes were harder for her than she had anticipated. "Yeah, I can imagine," she replied. "It's a big adjustment for you. And for Rachel too, I bet." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Ethan spoke again. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night." Laura's breath caught in her throat. Was he referring to their conversation after the wedding? She had been so vulnerable then, expressing fears she had kept hidden for so long. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear his thoughts on it. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "When we talked about me changing, and how it felt like you didn't know where you fit anymore," Ethan said carefully. "I don't want you to feel like that. I don't want you to think I don't need you. Because I do. I always will." Laura leaned back against the couch, closing her eyes as she listened to his words. The raw sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. But as much as she longed to hear him say that, part of her couldn't help but wonder if it was too late. "I don't know where I fit, Ethan," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to be a part of your life now that you have Rachel. It's like there's no room for me anymore, and I can't figure out how to make a space for myself." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was quieter, more thoughtful. "Mom, I don't want to lose you. I don't want you to feel like you don't matter in my life. But it's not just about having space for you. It's about finding a way to live in a way that works for both of us, where I'm not a kid anymore, but still your son." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. He was right. They couldn't go back to the way things were. Ethan had grown, and so had she. But that didn't mean they had to lose each other. It just meant that their relationship had to evolve. "I'm trying to figure that out too," Laura said, her voice steady now. "I don't know what the future looks like, but I know I don't want to lose you either. Maybe I've been holding on too tight to the way things were." Ethan let out a breath. "I think we both have. But that's okay. We're both learning. We'll figure it out. I just wanted you to know that I still need you. I always will." Laura closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. She could feel the familiar tug in her heart, the love for the boy she raised, and now the man he was becoming. She had been afraid of losing him, of being cast aside in the wake of his marriage. But in that moment, she realized something important. Ethan wasn't asking her to let go. He was asking her to change with him, to walk alongside him as he navigated this new chapter of his life. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." "You're welcome," he replied, his voice light again. "So, I was thinking maybe you and Rachel could come over for dinner sometime next week? We could all hang out, catch up. I'd love for you two to get to know each other better." Laura's heart lifted at the thought. This was new territory for her. But maybe it was the right step forward. The thought of spending time with Rachel, of opening up that new chapter in her life, didn't seem as daunting as it had before. She had a new role to play, yes, but it wasn't one of exclusion. She was still part of their world. It was just different now. "I'd love that," Laura said, smiling. "I'll talk to Sarah and figure out a time. I'm looking forward to it." "Great," Ethan replied. "We'll make it happen. I'll see you soon, okay?" "Okay," she said softly. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." "I love you." "I love you too, Mom." As she hung up the phone, Laura felt a sense of relief wash over her. Maybe they weren't at the same place they had been before, but they were still together. Still family. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The fear of the unknown had lessened, replaced by the quiet confidence that this new path wasn't one she had to walk alone. The days following her conversation with Ethan were filled with a sense of cautious optimism. Laura knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but she felt a flicker of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. It wasn't just about getting through the day anymore, it was about embracing the possibility of something new. She took her time to plan the dinner with Ethan and Rachel, carefully thinking through the details. She was nervous, of course she was, but this was the first time she had considered opening her heart to Rachel in a meaningful way. Until now, Rachel had always felt like an outsider, someone who had taken her son away from her, someone who had become a part of the world she wasn't sure how to fit into. But this dinner, it was an opportunity to start fresh, to build bridges instead of walls. And deep down, Laura knew that it was the right thing to do. She couldn't live in fear of change forever. If she wanted to have a place in Ethan's life, she had to be willing to meet him halfway, and that meant learning to accept Rachel, not as a rival, but as a new part of their world. As she set the table, placing the dinnerware carefully on the table in her cozy dining room, she thought about all the years she had spent imagining her family. She had always pictured Ethan bringing his friends over, but never a daughter-in-law sitting at the same table, sharing stories, laughing together. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was a step forward. She was learning to let go of the past, to embrace the future. It wasn't about forgetting the role she had played in Ethan's life. It was about understanding that her role was changing, and that change didn't diminish her place in his heart. The doorbell rang at precisely 6:30 p.m., and Laura's heart skipped in her chest. Ethan was here, Rachel too. She opened the door, and there they stood. Ethan in a casual button-up shirt, his smile wide, and Rachel, looking lovely in a soft green dress that complemented the evening light. She held a bottle of wine in her hands, her eyes lighting up when she saw Laura standing there, a mixture of nervousness and warmth in her expression. "Hi, Mrs. Harrison," Rachel said with a smile, stepping forward to give her a hug. It was a little awkward at first, but it was genuine, and Laura could feel her anxiety beginning to melt away. "Hey, Rachel," Laura said, her voice a little tight but trying to sound casual. "I'm so glad you could make it." "Thanks for inviting us," Rachel replied, her voice light and easy. "I thought we could bring wine, but if you prefer something else, just let me know." Laura laughed softly, stepping aside to let them in. "Wine sounds perfect," she said, gesturing for them to take a seat in the living room. "Come on in. Dinner's almost ready." As they moved toward the couch, Ethan smiled and looked at his mother. "You look good, Mom." "The house looks great too." "Thanks," Laura replied, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was small moments like these, simple, shared compliments, that felt like building blocks toward something more. Rachel settled into a chair across from Laura. "I love your home, by the way," she said, her eyes taking in the cozy, lived-in space. "It feels really homey." Laura smiled back, feeling a flicker of relief. She had been worried that Rachel might find her house old-fashioned or stuffy, but this felt easy. Rachel wasn't the enemy. She was just someone who loved Ethan, and Laura had to come to terms with that. "Thank you. It's been in the family for years," Laura replied, taking a deep breath. She glanced at Ethan, who was happily chatting with Rachel. He was comfortable with her, happy, even, and that was something Laura could appreciate. She wanted him to be happy. She wanted to be part of his life, to be included, and if that meant learning to accept Rachel, then so be it. "So, tell me, Rachel," Laura asked, breaking into the conversation. "How did you and Ethan meet?" The question seemed to catch Rachel off guard, but she smiled and took a deep breath. "Well, we met through a mutual friend. I just moved to the area, and they introduced us. We went out for coffee, and that was it, really. We just clicked." "That's nice," Laura said with a smile, pleased to see that Rachel was at ease. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a way for her to begin understanding the woman who had entered Ethan's life and become a part of it. "What do you do for work?" They spent the next few minutes talking casually, getting to know each other a little better. Laura could tell that Rachel was nervous, but she was trying. She was making an effort, and that meant something. As dinner was served, they all sat around the table, a plate of roasted chicken and vegetables at the center. The conversation flowed easily between them, light-hearted banter, a few funny stories from Ethan's childhood, and even some insights into Rachel's background. There was laughter, too. It wasn't forced or awkward, but real, the kind of laughter that came with shared memories. Ethan told a story about the time he tried to make his own breakfast when he was 10 and accidentally set off the smoke alarm. It had them all in stitches. For a brief moment, Laura felt a sense of peace she hadn't realized she had been longing for. Maybe it wasn't perfect, and maybe it would take time for them to adjust fully, but they were here together. She wasn't alone in this. Ethan was still her son, and he was still part of her world. And Rachel, well, Rachel wasn't the enemy. She was the woman who loved her son, and for that, she deserved respect. By the time dessert was served, the room was filled with the comfortable silence of people who had begun to understand each other, if only just a little bit. Ethan and Rachel offered to help clean up, but Laura insisted they relax. It felt good to be able to take care of them, to provide a safe space for this new dynamic to grow. As they said their goodbyes and Ethan and Rachel left for their own home, Laura stood in the doorway, watching them walk down the driveway. It wasn't perfect, and it might take time, but she realized something important in that moment. This was the beginning of something new. And no matter how much she had feared change, it was worth it. There was still room in her life for love, for family, and for Ethan, in all the forms he was going to take as he grew. It had been a few weeks since the dinner, and things between Laura and Rachel had started to feel a little more comfortable. Ethan had been checking in with her regularly, and although their relationship was still evolving, Laura was starting to feel a sense of connection with Rachel. It wasn't perfect yet, but the awkwardness had softened, and there was a mutual understanding growing between them. But as Laura sat on her porch one quiet evening, sipping her tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Everything seemed to be progressing, Ethan's life was moving forward, and she was slowly learning to accept the changes. Yet, she felt an undercurrent of uncertainty, like something was left unsaid, something lurking beneath the surface. She didn't want to admit it, but she had been holding onto a nagging feeling that she couldn't quite place. It was almost as though there was something Rachel wasn't sharing. Laura didn't know if it was just her paranoia or if it was the natural discomfort of a new family dynamic, but she had a feeling that there were things happening behind the scenes, things that she wasn't privy to. That night, as she settled into bed, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She realized that in all of her attempts to open up to Rachel, she hadn't truly opened herself up to the possibility that there were still things about her son's life that were beyond her control. She had spent so long trying to be everything to Ethan, trying to be the one constant in his life, that she hadn't fully processed what it meant to let go, what it meant to let him have space for the new people in his world, including Rachel. Maybe that was what had been bothering her all along, the feeling of being left behind, of not being fully involved in the choices Ethan was making. Yes, he had reassured her that she still mattered, but there was a quiet sense of distance between them. Rachel and Ethan were building their lives together, and Laura was still trying to figure out where she fit in that picture. The following week, Rachel invited her to lunch. They had been seeing each other regularly now, but this felt different. Laura couldn't put her finger on it, but there was something in the way Rachel had phrased the invitation that felt more intimate than usual. They met at a small, cozy cafe in town, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the pastries were warm. Rachel was already seated at a corner table when Laura arrived, and she waved as Laura walked through the door. "Hey, Laura," Rachel greeted her with a smile that was still a little shy but no less genuine. "Thanks for coming. I know you've been busy." Laura smiled back, sliding into the chair across from Rachel. "It's no problem. It's nice to get out for a bit." As the waiter brought over their drinks, there was a moment of silence. Rachel stirred her coffee absently, her eyes darting from the table to Laura, before she finally spoke. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," she said, her voice low but steady. Laura raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's on your mind?" Rachel hesitated for a moment, clearly gathering her thoughts. "I know things have been a little complicated between us, and I just wanted to say that I really appreciate how you've been trying. It's not easy, I know, but I think I owe it to you to be honest with you about something. About Ethan." The air between them seemed to shift. Laura leaned forward slightly, her curiosity piqued. She had been wondering what Rachel was really thinking, especially after the dinner a few weeks ago. She had felt that there was something there, a barrier she couldn't quite cross. "What do you mean?" Laura asked softly, sensing that Rachel wasn't just talking about their usual polite exchanges. Rachel took a deep breath. I'm sure you've noticed how close Ethan and I are now. We're planning things together. We're building a life together. And I think it's important to be upfront with you, especially as we all start to find our way in this new dynamic." Laura felt a pang in her chest. She had expected this, of course. Ethan and Rachel were building a life together, and she had to adjust to that. But hearing it from Rachel's mouth made it feel more real. "I'm not trying to take his place," Rachel continued, her voice earnest. "I know how important you are to him. But I also want you to know that I'm not trying to come between you two. I want us to find a way to coexist. I want us to be family." The sincerity in Rachel's eyes struck Laura in a way she wasn't expecting. For the first time, she saw Rachel not as the outsider, but as someone who genuinely wanted to make an effort, who wanted to ensure that Laura didn't feel displaced or forgotten in this new chapter of Ethan's life. "I appreciate that," Laura said quietly, her throat tight. "I really do. I've just been trying to figure out where I fit in all of this." Rachel nodded. "I understand. It's hard. But I think if we all work together, we can make it work. Ethan loves you so much, and I respect that. I want to make sure you feel included, even as things change." A weight lifted off Laura's chest as she listened to Rachel. It wasn't that she expected things to be perfect overnight, but this conversation felt like the start of something new. Rachel wasn't trying to replace her. She was trying to be part of something bigger, a family, albeit one that was slowly evolving. "I think we both have a lot to learn," Laura said, her voice steady. "But I'm willing to try. I don't want to lose Ethan, but I also want to be a part of your life too." Rachel smiled, her relief palpable. "I'm glad to hear that. I think we can make this work. One step at a time." As they finished their lunch, there was an unspoken understanding between them. It wasn't about forcing something to fit or trying to be something they weren't. It was about slowly, cautiously, finding a new rhythm. Laura left the cafe feeling lighter, with a quiet sense of hope blossoming inside her. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't need to. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the path to something better, a future where family meant more than just proximity. It was about connection. And that connection, she realized, could stretch beyond what she had once thought possible. The week following her lunch with Rachel felt like a turning point. Laura woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, though still a bit apprehensive about what was to come. The conversation with Rachel had planted seeds of hope, but Laura was careful not to get too carried away. Change had always been difficult for her, and while she was opening up to the idea of it, she didn't want to rush things. She needed time to adjust to the shifting dynamics of her relationship with Ethan and Rachel. However, as she navigated her daily routine, something was becoming increasingly clear. The more she tried to hold on to her past with Ethan, the more she felt like she was clinging to something that was slipping through her fingers. Every time she picked up the phone to call him, it felt as if he was living a life she wasn't entirely a part of anymore. And it hurt. It wasn't just about Rachel, though Laura had come to understand that Ethan's relationship with her was a significant part of the puzzle. It was about the bigger picture. Ethan was growing up, making decisions that didn't always involve her, and that was hard to swallow. One evening, after a particularly long day, Laura decided to call him. She hadn't spoken to him in a few days, and she missed him. The phone rang 3 times before Ethan answered, his voice warm but distant. "Hey, Mom. How's it going?" Laura hesitated for a moment, trying to keep the conversation light. "It's good, just the usual. How about you? How's everything with Rachel?" She could almost hear Ethan's smile through the phone. "It's good. We've just been busy, you know. Things are moving fast, but it's been great." There it was again. Ethan had always been someone who had a hard time slowing down, and now it seemed like everything in his life was moving at an accelerated pace: his relationship with Rachel, his career, his own journey toward adulthood. "I'm glad to hear that," Laura said, trying to keep the unease out of her voice. "I just wanted to check in with you. I know we don't talk as much anymore, but I've been thinking about you." Ethan's tone shifted slightly, more introspective. "I've been meaning to call too, Mom. I guess things have just been crazy. You know how it is." "I do," she said softly. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I don't know where I fit into all of this, into your life anymore." There was a long pause on the other end, and Laura could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. She wasn't sure if she had overstepped, if she had said too much, but it felt like the right time to voice the lingering doubt she had been carrying. "Mom," Ethan started, his voice lower now, almost hesitant. "I don't want you to feel left out. You're still such an important part of my life. But it's just different now, you know." Laura closed her eyes for a moment, bracing herself. She had known this, but hearing it from him made it harder to digest. Her son, the one she had raised and nurtured, was telling her that his life was moving in a direction that didn't always include her. "I understand, honey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to get used to the idea." The conversation turned back to lighter topics, but Laura couldn't shake the sense of sadness that lingered in her chest. Ethan was growing, evolving, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She had spent so much of her life being his mother, his constant, that she hadn't prepared herself for the day when he would have his own world, one that didn't necessarily revolve around her. After the call ended, Laura sat in silence, staring at the phone in her hand. The house felt too quiet. The familiar sounds of everyday life, dishes clinking in the sink, the hum of the refrigerator, felt almost foreign in the absence of Ethan's presence. She thought about the life she had built for herself, the routines she had created to fill the space he once occupied, and she realized that it wasn't enough anymore. There was something missing. A few days later, Laura decided to visit the local art gallery. It had been years since she'd gone, ever since Ethan had been young, and she used to take him there on rainy afternoons. She didn't expect to find any answers there, but she needed a distraction, something to help her clear her mind. The gallery was quieter than usual when she arrived, the soft echo of her footsteps on the hardwood floors the only sound accompanying her as she moved through the exhibits. She had always found peace in the art. There was something about the way colors and brushstrokes could capture emotions that words sometimes failed to do. As she walked through one of the larger rooms, she was drawn to a series of paintings depicting families. Some were vibrant and joyful, others more somber and introspective. But one painting, in particular, caught her eye. It was a portrait of a woman standing alone, looking out a window. The expression on her face was one of quiet contemplation, her hands clasped in front of her as if she were waiting for something, or perhaps someone. Laura stood in front of the painting for a long while, the quiet contemplation of the figure on the canvas resonating deeply with her. It was as though the artist had captured exactly how she felt. On the edge of something, but unsure of how to step forward. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, expecting a message from Ethan. But instead, it was a text from Rachel. "Hi, Laura. I just wanted to check in. I hope everything's okay. Ethan mentioned your call, and I just want to make sure you're doing all right. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Laura stared at the message for a moment, feeling a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. She wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't sure what she wanted from Rachel. But she realized something important as she stood in front of the painting. Maybe the real change she needed to embrace wasn't just about Ethan or Rachel. It was about her own ability to adapt, to let go of the past without feeling like she was losing herself in the process. She typed a quick response. "Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that. I'll be all right. Just figuring things out." After hitting send, she stood there for a while longer, her thoughts drifting. Maybe she didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, she felt like she was starting to understand what it meant to live in the present, not the past. And as she left the gallery, the weight on her shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. The following days felt like a blur for Laura. Her routine was the same. She went to work, tended to the house, and tried to keep her mind occupied with little things to avoid dwelling too much on the changes in her life. She'd had that conversation with Ethan, and she wasn't sure if it had made things better or worse. There was something in the way he had spoken to her, something that made her realize just how much they had both grown apart. She hadn't seen Ethan in person for a couple of weeks now, and although she spoke to him regularly on the phone, those calls always felt like they were punctuated with silences that weren't there before. She didn't blame him. She knew it was the natural course of things. He was building a life with Rachel, and he was becoming a man in his own right. Still, it left her feeling like an outsider in her own son's life. But then, out of the blue, she got a message from Rachel one afternoon. "Hi, Laura. I know this is a bit last minute, but would you be interested in coming to a small get-together we're hosting at our place this weekend? Just a few friends and family, nothing fancy. We'd love to have you there." At first, Laura hesitated. It had been a while since she had been invited into Ethan and Rachel's space in such an intimate way. She knew that she was still figuring out where she stood in all of this, but maybe this invitation was a step in the right direction. Maybe it was a way for her to reconnect with Ethan, to remind herself that she was still part of his world, even if things were different now. She typed a quick reply. "I'd love to come, Rachel. Thanks for thinking of me." As the weekend approached, Laura found herself both excited and nervous. She spent more time than usual getting ready, choosing her clothes carefully, fussing over her hair. She wanted to make a good impression, wanted to feel like she belonged. The thought of spending time in Ethan and Rachel's home made her realize just how much she had missed being around them, even in this new dynamic. When she arrived at Ethan and Rachel's house on Saturday afternoon, it was bustling with activity. The place was warm and welcoming, filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Ethan was standing by the kitchen island, chatting with a few people, and when he saw her walk through the door, his face lit up. "Mom," he called, his voice full of surprise and warmth. He hurried over to give her a hug, and for the first time in weeks, Laura felt like she was being pulled back into the fold. "I'm so glad you made it," Ethan said, stepping back and giving her a genuine smile. "Thanks for inviting me," Laura replied, feeling her nerves start to dissipate. "It's nice to see you, even if it's just for a little while." "Come on in," he said, leading her into the living room where Rachel was standing near the fireplace, greeting guests. "Hey, Laura," Rachel said warmly as she caught sight of her. "Glad you could join us." Laura smiled. "Thanks for having me. It's been a while since I've seen everyone." The evening was a blur of laughter, conversation, and the occasional clinking of wine glasses. Laura found herself seated at a cozy corner of the couch, watching Ethan and Rachel interact with their friends, and for a moment, it was as though she could slip into their world, as though she had always belonged there. As the night wore on, she had several conversations with Ethan and Rachel. There was something different in the air, a shift in how they all interacted. It wasn't exactly the same as it had been in the past, but it wasn't uncomfortable either. Ethan had a way of making Laura feel at ease, even as they navigated this new version of their relationship. There were still the occasional awkward moments, but they were becoming less frequent. But as the evening began to wind down, Laura found herself alone in the kitchen with Rachel, who was clearing some empty plates from the table. It was a small, quiet moment, and something in Rachel's expression made Laura's heart skip a beat. It was as if she was waiting for the right moment to say something. "Is everything okay, Laura?" Rachel asked, her tone soft but direct. Laura blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" I know this is all a lot," Rachel said, setting the plates down and leaning against the counter. "And I want you to know that we're not trying to shut you out or make you feel left behind. I just wanted to make sure that you're feeling okay about everything." Laura stared at her for a moment. There was something genuine in Rachel's words, something that reached her in a way she hadn't expected. She had been so focused on trying to adjust to Ethan's new life and relationship that she hadn't truly stopped to think about how Rachel might be feeling. After all, Rachel was the new person in all of this, the one trying to navigate her place in a family that wasn't entirely her own. "I'm trying," Laura said slowly, her voice unsteady. "I know this is all new for all of us. It's just hard. I don't want to be the mom who can't let go, but it feels like I don't know where I fit anymore." Rachel nodded, her eyes softening with understanding. "I get it. It's a lot, especially when everything is changing so quickly. But you're always going to be Ethan's mom. That's never going to change. And I really hope we can find a way to make this work, not just for Ethan, but for you too." There was a long pause as Laura absorbed Rachel's words. She didn't know if everything would work out perfectly, but for the first time in a while, she felt like she wasn't alone in trying to figure it all out. "Thank you," Laura said, her voice thick with emotion. "I appreciate that. I really do." Rachel smiled, the warmth in her eyes evident. "We're family now, Laura. And family has to stick together." The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. Laura felt a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step toward healing, toward finding a place for herself in this new reality. As she left the party that night, Laura couldn't help but feel a little lighter. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there would be more adjustments to come. But for the first time, she realized that the space between her and Ethan, and even between her and Rachel, didn't have to feel so vast. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for everyone. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following days felt like a continuation of the shift that had begun when Laura attended Ethan and Rachel's get-together. Though the evening had been filled with awkward moments, there was also an undeniable sense of progress, like a door had cracked open, and for the first time in a while, she felt like she might have a place on the other side. The conversations with Rachel and Ethan had left a lingering warmth in her heart, but also a clarity. It was clear to Laura that no one was trying to shut her out, and more importantly, no one expected her to become someone else. She could still be Ethan's mom, even as he built a life with Rachel. It wasn't about replacing her or making her fade into the background. It was about evolving, just like they were, and finding a way to adapt to the changes without losing the essence of who she was. That week, Laura threw herself into her work and her routines with a new sense of determination. She found herself reflecting more on the past, on how much she had given up, how much she had sacrificed over the years to be the best mom she could be for Ethan. Now, there was a sense of freedom in knowing that her relationship with him wasn't defined by his need for her. She was his mother, but he was also his own person, and that was something to celebrate, not mourn. One evening, while sitting at her kitchen table, Laura found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. She came across a picture of Ethan as a child, his face covered in chocolate, a mischievous grin on his lips. It was one of those moments that felt like it had happened just yesterday. She could almost hear his laughter, the carefree sound that used to fill the house. A sudden wave of emotion washed over her, and for a moment, Laura just allowed herself to feel it, to miss those moments, to appreciate them, and to accept that those days were behind her. But that didn't mean they had to stay there forever. She snapped out of her reverie when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel. "Hey, Laura. I know we've been talking about catching up more. How about coffee sometime this week? Let me know what day works for you." Laura stared at the message for a moment, feeling a mixture of surprise and appreciation. She'd been so focused on navigating her relationship with Ethan that she hadn't given much thought to her dynamic with Rachel. But now, the idea of getting to know her better, on a personal level, outside of just being Ethan's girlfriend, seemed like an opportunity she hadn't considered. She quickly typed a response. "I'd love that. How about Thursday afternoon?" "Perfect. I'll pick a spot and send you the details." The next few days flew by, and before she knew it, it was Thursday afternoon. Rachel had chosen a cozy little cafe on the edge of town, nothing too fancy, just a quiet spot where they could talk and sip coffee without the noise of the world intruding. When Laura arrived, she spotted Rachel right away, sitting by the window, a steaming cup of coffee in front of her. Rachel's warm smile greeted her, and Laura felt a surge of gratitude. "Hi, Laura," Rachel said, standing up to give her a quick hug. "I'm so glad you could make it." "I'm glad too," Laura replied, taking a seat across from her. "It's nice to get out of the house for a bit." They both chuckled, and after a few moments of settling into their conversation, Rachel asked, "So, how have you been?" "Really been doing okay since everything's changed." Laura paused. She had thought about this question a lot since her conversation with Ethan. "Honestly, I've been figuring it out. Some days are better than others. But I'm learning to accept things, I think. Not everything needs to stay the same forever, you know." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know it can't be easy, watching Ethan move forward with his life and with me, especially when things were so different before. But I want you to know I'm really not trying to replace you. I don't want to be a wedge between you two." Laura smiled softly, touched by the sincerity in Rachel's voice. "I never thought you were trying to replace me. I just wasn't sure where I fit in anymore. It's been hard for me to step back and let him go." Rachel leaned in slightly, her eyes kind. "It's hard for me, too. I know I'm new in his life, and I'm not trying to be the other woman. I just want to be there for him, but I also want to be someone you can rely on, too, if you need it." There was a certain vulnerability in Rachel's words that Laura hadn't expected. It made her realize just how much Rachel was trying to make this work, not just for Ethan, but for Laura as well. "You don't have to worry about that," Laura said after a beat. "I just need some time to adjust. This whole thing is a lot for me, but I'm not going anywhere. Ethan is still my son, and that will never change." The conversation drifted to lighter topics after that, but there was something in the air, a sense of understanding that hadn't existed before. Rachel wasn't just Ethan's girlfriend anymore. She was becoming someone Laura could trust, someone who was making an effort to be part of her life, too. As they finished their coffee and said their goodbyes, Laura felt a new sense of hope. She was beginning to see that the space between her and Ethan wasn't a gap to be feared. It was an opportunity for new connections, new understanding. Rachel wasn't the enemy, she was just another part of Ethan's journey, and if Laura could learn to accept that, there was a chance for something positive to come from it. As Laura walked back to her car, she smiled to herself. There was still a long road ahead, but today, she felt lighter. For the first time in a while, she was no longer afraid of the future. She could see it, a future where she could be both a mother and a woman living her own life. And for now, that was enough. The following week felt strangely different for Laura. The conversation with Rachel had left her with a sense of clarity she hadn't expected. She had always viewed Ethan's relationship with Rachel through a lens of uncertainty, wondering where she fit in, how she could hold on to her place in his life as his mother while watching him forge his own path. But Rachel had, in her own quiet way, reassured Laura that there was room for all of them, in different but meaningful ways. Still, as much as she had found peace in that conversation, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had always been a person of action, someone who worked to make things right. Sitting back and waiting for things to settle didn't come naturally to her. But she also knew that pushing too hard, trying to force things, could backfire. One evening, Laura decided to take matters into her own hands. She hadn't seen Ethan in person since the party at his place a few weeks ago, and while their phone calls had been more frequent, they still carried an emotional distance that left Laura feeling disconnected. She knew it was time to take a step, to show him that she was ready to move forward, both for him and for herself. She sent him a text message. "Hey, Ethan. It's been a while. How about we grab lunch sometime this week? Just the two of us." She hit send and waited, her nerves tingling with anticipation. It wasn't that Ethan would say no, he always made time for her, even with his busy life. But it was the weight of the silence in their relationship, the space between them that had only grown more noticeable as the months had passed. It didn't take long for him to reply. "I'd love that, Mom. How about Thursday?" Relief washed over Laura, but she also felt a knot in her stomach. This lunch wasn't just about catching up, it was about re-establishing their connection, navigating the new space they had found themselves in. Ethan was an adult now. He had his own life, his own responsibilities. But she wasn't just his mother anymore. She was someone who had to figure out how to fit into his world without overshadowing it, but still remain a part of it. Thursday came quickly, and Laura spent the morning feeling a mix of emotions. She was excited to see Ethan, but there was also a quiet anxiety gnawing at her. Would things feel the same? Would they be able to find their rhythm again, or would the distance between them continue to widen? She arrived at the cafe early, taking a seat by the window, watching the bustle of the city outside. She had chosen the spot because it reminded her of the places they used to go when Ethan was younger, when their weekends were filled with casual outings and easy conversations. As she sipped her coffee, she saw him walk through the door. Ethan looked the same, tall, with that familiar disarming smile, his eyes as warm as ever. But there was a maturity about him now, a calm confidence that only came from growing into oneself. As he saw her, his face lit up. "Mom," he greeted, his voice full of affection as he came over to give her a hug. It was one of those moments when Laura could still feel the echoes of the little boy who used to cling to her in moments of uncertainty, but now he was a man, his own person, with his own life to lead. They sat down, and the conversation flowed easily at first. They talked about work, about friends, about the mundane details of life. Laura was careful not to mention anything too heavy, trying to read the room. But she couldn't ignore the underlying tension that still lingered. It wasn't a bad tension, it was the kind of quiet unease that comes with trying to rebuild a relationship that had shifted, to find footing in a new territory. As they finished their meals, Laura decided it was time to bring up what had been on her mind for weeks. "Ethan," she began softly, "I've been thinking a lot about things lately. About us, about everything. I know I've been struggling to adjust to how different things are now, but I want you to know that I'm here no matter what. I don't want to be the kind of mother who makes you feel like you have to choose between me and your own life." Ethan looked at her, his gaze steady and full of warmth. He didn't say anything immediately, but she could tell he was thinking carefully before responding. "Mom," he said after a long pause, "I know things have been hard. It's not just you. It's been an adjustment for me too. I never wanted to make you feel left out, but it's hard to figure out how to balance everything. I'm building this new life with Rachel, and it feels like things are changing faster than I can keep up with." Laura felt a lump form in her throat. "I understand that, Ethan. I do. I know you have your own life to live. I don't expect to be the center of it, but she paused, gathering her words carefully. "I just don't want to feel like I'm disappearing from it. I don't want to be the person who clings to the past, but I also don't want to be the person who's left behind either." There was a brief silence between them as Ethan seemed to process her words. He took a deep breath, his eyes softening. "Mom, I've never wanted you to feel like that. You're always going to be my mom, no matter what. I'm still figuring this out, and I know that I haven't always been great at it. I think I've been avoiding some things that need to be said, and I'm sorry for that." The honesty in Ethan's voice hit Laura harder than she expected. It was as if a weight had been lifted off both of their shoulders in that moment. He wasn't just giving her words to comfort her, he was acknowledging the reality of what they were both going through. "I appreciate you saying that," Laura replied quietly, her heart a little lighter. "I think we both just need to figure out what this new chapter looks like together." They sat there for a moment, simply taking in the quiet peace that settled between them. It wasn't an instant fix, nor was it an easy conversation, but it was a step. A small, but significant one. For the first time in a long while, Laura felt like she was no longer standing at the edge of something uncertain. There was room for both of them in this new reality. As they parted ways, Ethan gave her another hug, his arms a little tighter than before. "I love you, Mom," he said simply. "I love you too, Ethan," she whispered back. And with that, Laura walked away, feeling something she hadn't in a long time, a hope. It wasn't that everything was perfect, or that all the answers were clear. But there was something beautiful in the unspoken truth they had both just shared. They were both learning to move forward in their own ways, but they would always have each other. And sometimes, that was enough. The weeks that followed the lunch with Ethan felt like a delicate balance. Laura had seen the cracks in their relationship before, but now, after their conversation, there was a fragile optimism that had taken root. Ethan had always been her son, but now they were learning how to be two adults navigating the complicated space between mother and child. While the emotional distance hadn't disappeared entirely, Laura felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't going to cling to the past anymore. She was ready to move forward, to embrace this new phase in her life, even if it meant letting go of certain expectations. She had already taken the first step by talking to Ethan. Now, she had to continue rebuilding trust and proving to herself that she could be okay with change. But, of course, things weren't perfect. There were moments, like late at night when she lay awake in bed, that she still felt the weight of everything. Sometimes, she found herself remembering how easy it used to be his number one. She missed that intimacy, the way they could talk about anything, the way she was his unwavering support. But now, with Rachel in the picture, she had to accept that their relationship would never be exactly as it had been. And that was okay. It was just different. Laura had been spending more time with Rachel, as she promised. Their coffees had turned into weekly outings, and though the conversations were always a bit cautious at first, there was an unmistakable warmth building between them. It was slow, perhaps too slow for Laura's liking, but it was progress. Still, there were days when she felt that old knot in her stomach. Was she really okay with it all? That thought became even more pronounced when Ethan and Rachel invited Laura to join them for a weekend getaway to the mountains. Ethan had mentioned it casually, as though it was no big deal, but Laura could sense there was more to it. It wasn't just about the trip, it was a gesture. An effort to bring her into their lives more, to make her feel included in this new dynamic. It was an olive branch. And, truthfully, Laura wasn't sure she was ready to accept it yet. The weekend loomed large in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into an unfamiliar territory. She had agreed to go mostly because she didn't want to appear distant, but also because a small part of her wanted to prove to herself that she could do this. She could accept Rachel, she could find peace in this new arrangement, and she could still have a place in Ethan's world. As the day of the trip arrived, Laura packed her bags, her mind racing with thoughts of the past. She kept telling herself that this was going to be a good thing, that she was doing the right thing. But the uncertainty lingered. When she arrived at the cabin, the warmth of the wood-burning stove greeted her, along with the familiar sound of Ethan's laughter as he and Rachel unpacked the car. Laura felt a wave of nostalgia. This place had once been a sanctuary. A place where she and Ethan had shared countless weekends, escaping the rush of life to find peace and closeness. It was bittersweet, standing there now, knowing that so much had changed. "You made it," Ethan said, rushing over to hug her. His enthusiasm was contagious, and for a moment, Laura felt that familiar spark of affection for him. "I'm here," Laura said with a smile, trying to hide the nerves that fluttered in her stomach. Rachel gave her a warm hug as well. "I'm so glad you could come. I've been wanting us all to have a chance to spend some time together, away from everything." They settled into the cozy cabin, and for the first few hours, things felt almost normal. They cooked dinner together, laughed, and even shared old stories of past trips. But as the evening wore on, Laura could sense the invisible boundaries they were all dancing around. The silence that came after a joke, the careful way they phrased their sentences, as though they were all trying not to step on each other's toes. Later, as they sat around the fire, Laura couldn't help but notice how comfortable Ethan and Rachel were together. Their ease with one another, the way their hands brushed occasionally, the soft smiles they exchanged, it was so obvious that they had found something real in each other. And in that moment, Laura felt like an outsider. She hadn't meant to, but the loneliness crept in. She wasn't jealous, at least. She didn't think she was. But there was a sadness she couldn't ignore. She realized that she missed the days when Ethan had been hers to guide, when their bond had been so tight that nothing could come between them. And now, it wasn't just Rachel, it was Ethan growing up, growing into his own person, and she wasn't sure where she fit in that equation anymore. As the fire crackled, Rachel broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Laura," she began, her voice tentative. "Ethan and I want you to know that we're not trying to replace you. You'll always be a part of his life. We want you to feel included, to feel like this is still your family too." Laura swallowed hard. "I know. It's just hard to let go. I've spent so many years taking care of Ethan, guiding him, being the one who knew everything about him. And now, I'm not sure where I belong." Ethan looked at her, his eyes soft. "Mom, I've never wanted you to feel like you don't belong. This isn't about pushing you out. It's about building a new kind of relationship, all three of us. And we're still figuring it out." The honesty in his words hit Laura like a wave. She could see that he was trying so hard to make everything work. But what he didn't realize, what no one realized, was that it wasn't just about him. It was about her too. Laura wasn't sure how to step into this new version of their family. She wasn't sure where she fit. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Laura realized that there was no clear answer to her questions. She couldn't rush the process, couldn't expect everything to fall into place overnight. The reality was that she had to learn to let go. Not of Ethan, but of the way things used to be. Her relationship with him was evolving, just as he was. And maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. The next morning, she woke up with a sense of clarity. She didn't need to have everything figured out right away. All she had to do was keep showing up, keep being there for Ethan, for Rachel, and for herself. She was still his mother, and no matter what, she would always have a place in his heart. The weekend in the mountains was more than just a getaway. It was a turning point. Laura had come to the cabin unsure of where she stood, unsure of how she could possibly navigate this new chapter in her relationship with Ethan and Rachel. But as she drove back home, something inside her had shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She had started to accept that change wasn't just a part of life, it was a necessary part of growth. And though it hurt, she realized that there was beauty in the process of letting go. After the trip, Laura found herself thinking about the future more. She knew she couldn't continue holding on to the past, no matter how much she longed for it. It was hard to admit to herself, but the truth was that she had to let Ethan forge his own path. His future wasn't about her anymore. It was about him and Rachel and the life they were building together. It wasn't that Laura wanted to be excluded from that future. She didn't. But she had to learn how to be a part of it in a new way, without the expectations and the old roles that she had so deeply identified with. It was difficult, but it was time to step aside, just a little, and allow Ethan to define the kind of relationship they would have moving forward. It was a week later when Ethan called her again. His voice was full of excitement. "Mom, we need to talk about something," he began. "Rachel and I have been talking, and we want to take the next step. We've decided to move in together. I wanted to let you know because it's important to me that you're a part of this decision." The news hit Laura like a jolt of electricity. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing it spoken out loud made it all too real. It wasn't just about Ethan getting married. It was about Ethan and Rachel building a life together, making decisions that would shape their future. "Wow," Laura said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't expect it to happen so soon. But I'm happy for you both. You've thought this through, right?" "Yeah, we've been talking about it for a while," Ethan replied. "It feels right, Mom. I want you to know, we're still figuring everything out. I want you involved in the process. Maybe you can help us find a place or give us some advice on how to make this work." It was an unexpected offer, but a welcome one. Laura hadn't expected to be included in the decision-making process. She had thought of this as Ethan's life, and she would be a quiet bystander, offering support from the sidelines. But this was different. They wanted her input. They wanted her to be part of the journey. "Of course, I'd love to help," she said, her voice softening. "You know I'll always be there for you, Ethan. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Promise me you'll communicate. Don't let the small things pile up. Rachel is important to you, and I can tell she's a great person. I just want you to be honest with her and with yourself, always." "I promise, Mom," he said, sounding sincere. "And I promise you, no matter what happens, you'll always be a part of my life. Nothing's going to change that." Laura smiled, feeling a knot in her chest loosen just a little. She had always wanted what was best for Ethan, and she wanted him to be happy. She wanted him to find peace, to find love, and to create a life that was meaningful and fulfilling. As painful as it was to admit, she realized that he was doing just that without her, but still with her by his side. The next few weeks were a blur of activity as Ethan and Rachel began looking for an apartment. Laura threw herself into the process, helping with everything from researching neighborhoods to giving advice on furniture and decor. It was an odd sensation being so involved in their lives, but also feeling like an outsider in the space they were creating for themselves. But there was something comforting in knowing that they wanted her to be there. Even if she wasn't a part of the day-to-day decisions, she could still be a part of the bigger picture. And in that, she found a quiet peace. One evening, after they had finalized the apartment details, Ethan and Rachel invited Laura over to see the place. It was small, but cozy, and they had already started decorating it with a mix of modern and vintage furniture. Laura had expected it to feel strange, almost like a betrayal, but when she walked through the door, she felt a sense of warmth, not only from the space, but from the people in it. It felt like a home, and more importantly, it felt like Ethan's home. "Do you like it?" Rachel asked, her eyes full of anticipation. "I do," Laura said with a soft smile. "It's perfect for you too. It feels like you." "That's what we were going for," Ethan said, grinning. "We wanted it to be our own space, but still comfortable for you too." For a moment, Laura just stood there, taking it all in. This was happening. Her son was building a life, creating a future. And as much as it stung to let go of the role she once had in his life, she knew it was time to embrace this new chapter. She had already made peace with it in her heart. This wasn't a goodbye. It was a shift, a change, and sometimes change was the best thing for everyone involved. Later, as they sat on the couch, chatting about small details for the move, Ethan leaned over and put his hand on hers. "Thanks for helping us with all of this, Mom," he said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. "I know it's been a lot, but it means the world to me that you're here with us." Laura squeezed his hand, her eyes misting over with emotion. "I'm always here for you, Ethan. Always." It was in that moment that Laura realized she had finally come full circle. She had let go of the past, accepted the future, and found a place for herself in it. No longer the centerpiece of Ethan's life, but still an irreplaceable part of it. And that was enough. The apartment was officially theirs. The moving boxes were unpacked, the furniture arranged, and the walls adorned with the soft touches of a home. Ethan and Rachel had settled in, their lives now intertwining in a new space that was entirely their own. For Laura, it was both a sense of accomplishment and a reminder of how quickly life changed. She had always been Ethan's first point of contact. She had been the one to tie his shoes, help him with homework, offer comfort when he was sick or heartbroken. But now, seeing him in this new home, alongside Rachel, she couldn't help but feel the pull of change again. It was bittersweet, this new version of Ethan. He was no longer just her little boy. He was becoming the man he was meant to be. But there was something else. Something Laura couldn't quite put into words. She had been struggling with the idea that her relationship with Ethan had changed, that there was no longer a daily connection like there had been before. But what struck her now was something deeper, a question she couldn't shake. Was she still needed? Was she still relevant in his life in the same way? She didn't like to admit it, but a part of her felt a bit invisible. Rachel was now the one who shared the daily routine with Ethan. She was the one he would come home to after work, the one he shared meals with, the one he would talk to about his dreams and frustrations. It was natural. It was what happened when people grew up. But it didn't make it any easier to swallow. As the days passed, Laura tried to push aside the feeling of emptiness that occasionally bubbled to the surface. She knew she had to adjust. This was part of the process. But there was still a quiet longing that tugged at her heart. One afternoon, after she had dropped off some groceries at their new place, an unexpected visit, just to check in, Ethan caught her at the door. His expression was warm, but there was a subtle seriousness in his eyes. "Hey, Mom," he said, stepping outside with her into the hallway. "Rachel and I were talking, and we want to invite you to dinner this weekend. We were thinking about making your favorite recipe. You know, the one with the chicken and the garlic mashed potatoes." Laura smiled, surprised by the gesture. "That sounds nice, honey," she said, trying to keep her voice light. But beneath her smile, there was something unresolved, something she hadn't told him, something she wasn't sure how to say. "You've been kind of distant lately," Ethan continued, his voice tentative. "Is everything okay? I know things have changed, but I don't want you to feel left out. You're still a big part of my life, Mom." The words caught her off guard. She had spent so much time pretending everything was fine, pushing away the emotions she didn't know how to deal with. But hearing him speak so openly made her realize that maybe she had been distant, not just physically, but emotionally too. "I'm fine," she said, though the words felt hollow. "I'm just adjusting, you know? It's a big change for both of us. I'll be there on Saturday for dinner." Ethan gave her a concerned look, but didn't push further. "I know it's hard. But you don't have to adjust on your own, Mom. Rachel and I are here for you, too." As Laura left the apartment, she felt the weight of his words pressing on her chest. She had always tried to be strong for Ethan, to be the rock in his life. But now it was becoming clear that she wasn't just adjusting to his new life, she was adjusting to her own. And that was harder than she ever could have imagined. The dinner on Saturday was a warm affair. Rachel had outdone herself in the kitchen, and Laura couldn't help but feel a wave of affection for the young woman who had seamlessly entered her son's life. There was a comfort in seeing them together, both of them so at ease with each other. It was exactly what Ethan had needed, and Laura could see that. But still, the familiar sense of disconnection lingered in the back of her mind. She wasn't sure if it was the dinner itself, or just the underlying reality of her new place in Ethan's world, but there was a subtle shift that she hadn't fully processed yet. Throughout the evening, Ethan and Rachel shared stories, made plans for their future, and talked about the small details of their lives, things that felt so ordinary, yet so intimate. Laura joined in, of course, but there was something about the way they looked at each other, the way they were building a life together, that made her realize how much she had to let go of. As the night wore on, and the conversation slowed, Laura felt the familiar tug of nostalgia. She missed the days when she had been the center of Ethan's world, when he had looked to her for answers and comfort. But she also realized that she wasn't the same person she had been back then, and neither was Ethan. They had both changed, and the truth was that they both needed space to grow. Ethan seemed to sense her quietness. He got up from his seat and walked over to her. "I know this isn't easy, Mom," he said, his voice soft. "But I just want you to know that you're still a part of my life, always. I can't imagine it any other way." Laura smiled, her throat tightening. She had heard the words before, but hearing him say them now, in this moment, filled her with something more than relief. It filled her with love. And maybe, just maybe, it filled her with the courage to let go. "I know, Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know. And I'm proud of you. I really am." As the evening drew to a close, Laura realized something important. Change was inevitable, but it didn't have to erase the bond they shared. No matter how different their lives became, Ethan would always be her son. And as much as she had to accept his independence, she also had to accept that she was not losing him. She was just learning how to love him in a new way. And maybe that was the hardest part of all. The days following the dinner were quiet. Laura found herself spending more time in her own space, reflecting on the changes in her life. The empty moments between phone calls and text messages with Ethan grew longer, and she began to feel the absence of his daily presence more acutely. It wasn't a sorrowful feeling, but rather a complex mixture of pride, loss, and gratitude. She had always seen herself as the caretaker, the one who kept everything together. But in the quiet of her apartment, Laura realized that she had to learn to redefine her role in Ethan's life. It wasn't that she wanted to disappear, far from it. She simply had to accept that the relationship was no longer about being needed every day, but about offering support from the sidelines, cheering him on as he carved out his own future. It was the morning after a particularly long week when Laura found herself in the kitchen, making her favorite cup of coffee, when her phone buzzed on the countertop. She glanced at the screen. It was a text from Ethan. "Mom, Rachel and I are thinking about taking a weekend trip to the coast. We'd love for you to join us. We've been talking, and we want you to be a part of our adventures. What do you think? It's been a while since we've spent some time together." For a moment, Laura just stared at the message, unsure of what to think. A weekend trip with Ethan and Rachel? She hadn't expected such an invitation. There had been a part of her that assumed her role in their lives would gradually fade. But here was Ethan extending a hand, inviting her to be a part of their journey, their new life together. Laura felt a warm rush of emotion. It wasn't just the fact that they wanted her to come, it was the unspoken message behind it. They saw her. They wanted her involved, not out of obligation, but because they valued her presence in their lives. She quickly typed out her reply. "I'd love to. That sounds amazing. I'll pack my bags." As soon as she hit send, a sense of excitement began to build within her. A weekend away by the coast felt like just what she needed, an opportunity to reconnect, not just with Ethan, but with herself. The past months had been full of emotional shifts and personal growth, but now it was time to enjoy the small moments of happiness. The weekend arrived faster than Laura anticipated, and before she knew it, she was in the car with Ethan and Rachel, heading toward the coast. The sun was setting as they drove along the winding roads that led to the small beach town they had chosen. Laura sat in the back seat, looking out the window at the fading light, feeling the gentle pull of the ocean breeze. The trip felt different from the ones they used to take when Ethan was younger. Back then, it was always about family, about togetherness, about a sense of stability. Now, there was something more fluid, more free. Ethan and Rachel seemed to have a rhythm together, a dance that Laura had to learn how to observe rather than participate in. But she didn't mind. There was joy in watching them together. As they arrived at their rented beach house, Ethan helped Laura with her bags, and Rachel greeted her with a warm hug. "Welcome to our weekend getaway," Rachel said, her voice bright. "We've got everything planned out, but feel free to just relax and enjoy." The house was cozy, with large windows that looked out over the beach. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore provided a soothing backdrop to the evening. It was the kind of place that made you want to sit on the porch, sip a glass of wine, and watch the sunset. It was perfect. That night, after a simple dinner of fresh seafood, they sat on the porch with glasses in hand, the sea breeze ruffling their hair. Ethan and Rachel chatted about their work, their plans, and the things they were looking forward to in the coming months. Laura listened, content, as the sound of their voices blended with the rhythmic sound of the ocean. "Mom," Ethan said after a while, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "We've been talking about the future, about where we want to go, what we want to do. And I want you to know that no matter what, you're always going to be part of our lives. You're an important part of this family. Even when we start making our own decisions, we want to include you." The words felt like a balm to Laura's heart. She had spent so much time worrying about her place in their future, and here was Ethan, reassuring her that she still had a place, one that was just as important as it ever was, though different. "I'm proud of you both," Laura said, her voice thick with emotion. "I see how happy you make each other, and that means the world to me." Rachel smiled and nodded, her hand resting gently on Ethan's. "We couldn't do this without your support, Laura. We wouldn't want to." The weekend passed in a blur of laughter, long walks on the beach, and quiet moments of reflection. Laura found herself enjoying the new dynamic between her, Ethan, and Rachel. It wasn't just about the past anymore, it was about a future they were all building together. On the last night, as they sat around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and watching the stars above, Ethan spoke again. "You know, Mom," he said quietly, "this weekend has been one of the best times we've had together in a while. I hope you know how much you mean to us. Even when things feel different, you're still such a huge part of my life. And that's never going to change." Laura smiled, her heart full. In this quiet moment, she realized that change wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. She wasn't losing Ethan, she was gaining a new relationship with him, one built on respect, understanding, and love. And in that new space, she could finally see the truth. She was not just his mother. She was also his ally, his friend, and a part of the new world he was creating. It was a different kind of love, one that was just as strong, just as deep, but woven with more freedom and space for both of them to grow. As the fire burned low, Laura felt something inside her shift again. She wasn't the only one changing. Ethan was too. And that was okay. It was more than okay, it was beautiful. As Laura returned home from the trip, she felt a new sense of calm that she hadn't experienced in a while. The weekend had been more than just a getaway. It had been a reminder that relationships could evolve, and that growth wasn't always about moving on from the past, but rather embracing new forms of connection. The next week passed in its usual rhythm: work, errands, quiet evenings at home. Yet there was a quiet change within Laura. She no longer felt the heaviness of uncertainty looming over her. She was starting to see her relationship with Ethan in a new light. And with that, she felt ready to take on the challenges that lay ahead, whatever they might be. One evening, as Laura sat down to dinner, her phone buzzed again. It was Ethan. "Hey, Mom. I wanted to talk to you about something. Do you have a minute?" Laura's heart skipped a beat. Ethan rarely called or texted with such urgency anymore. Had something happened? She quickly typed back, "Of course, honey. What's going on?" The reply came almost instantly. "Can we meet tomorrow? I have something I want to share with you. It's big." Her curiosity piqued. Laura agreed to meet him the following day, setting a time to meet at their favorite cafe. The next day, Laura arrived at the cafe early, as she often did. She sat at a corner table, sipping her coffee, scanning the familiar surroundings. This place had always been one of Ethan's favorites, and over the years, it had become their quiet place, a spot where they could talk about anything, no matter how trivial or significant. It was also the place where Ethan had first shared his dreams of becoming a lawyer, a dream that had felt so distant at the time, but was now a reality. When Ethan walked in, he was alone. His face carried a mix of excitement and nervousness that Laura hadn't seen in a while. "Mom," he said, as he slid into the seat across from her. "I'm glad you could meet me. What's going on, honey?" Laura asked, her voice gentle but curious. "You seem serious. More than usual." Ethan took a deep breath, his hands resting on the table as if to steady himself. "I've been thinking about something," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "Rachel and I have been talking a lot about the future, about our life together. And well," he paused, looking at Laura, his eyes searching for her reaction. "I want you to know that it's not just about us anymore. It's about all of us." Laura felt a pang of uncertainty. What was he trying to say? "Ethan, I don't understand." "What do you mean?" Ethan took another deep breath. I want you to know that I'm ready to take the next step. Rachel and I want to get married." His words hung in the air, and Laura felt her heart skip. "Ethan," she whispered, "that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both." But there was more, she could tell. Ethan wasn't done. "Thanks, Mom. But there's something else," he continued, his voice growing more serious. "We're planning on starting our own family soon. And that's why I wanted to talk to you now. Because I need you to know that, no matter what happens, you will always be a part of my family. I want you to be there for us, just like you've always been there for me." Laura felt her breath catch. The reality of the situation was sinking in. Ethan wasn't just talking about his future with Rachel, he was talking about a future that included her. A future where she had a new role, a new place to fill. "I'm not sure how to feel about all of this," Laura confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've always seen myself as your mom, your protector. But now, with everything changing, I'm realizing that I have to let go a little. And it's harder than I expected." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. "You don't have to let go of everything, Mom. I'm not going anywhere. You're still my mom. You always will be. But I also want to make sure that as we move forward, you know you're welcome in every part of our life. You're not just an observer. You're an important part of the future I'm building with Rachel." Tears sprang to Laura's eyes, unbidden. This was the moment she had been waiting for, but it wasn't easy. It was a bittersweet realization. Ethan was growing up, becoming his own man. But at the same time, he was reminding her that she would never be completely out of his life. She was needed, but in a different way. The thought was both heartwarming and humbling. "I'm proud of you, Ethan," Laura said, squeezing his hand. "I'm so proud of everything you've become. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. Everything I am, I owe to you," he replied, his voice sincere. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling of gratitude that had settled within her. For the first time in a long time, she realized that change wasn't something to fear, it was something to be embraced. She wasn't losing Ethan, but instead, she was gaining a new place in his life, just as he was gaining a new role as a partner and future father. The next chapter of their lives was just beginning. And Laura couldn't wait to see where it would take them all. The days after Ethan's revelation were filled with reflection. Laura found herself looking at the world around her through a different lens. It wasn't just about accepting the changes in her son's life, it was also about how these changes affected her own sense of self. In the past, her identity had been so tightly bound to her role as Ethan's mother. The years of nurturing, guiding, and watching him grow into the man he was today had given her life meaning. But now, as she stood on the precipice of another transformation, she wondered, who was she without the role of the all-important mother? Ethan was becoming his own person, and her life was inevitably shifting with his. But that didn't scare her. No, Laura had learned over the past year that change was necessary. It was how people grew. And for the first time in a long while, she was excited about the potential that lay ahead, not just for Ethan, but for herself as well. The following weekend, Laura decided to visit the local art gallery. She had always loved art but hadn't made time for it in years. The soft hum of the gallery, the colorful canvases that adorned the walls, the quiet murmur of other visitors, all of it felt like a balm to her soul. She wandered through the exhibits, letting the paintings and sculptures wash over her. There was one particular piece that caught her eye, a painting of a woman standing on a cliff, staring out at the vast horizon. The sky was filled with vibrant hues of orange, pink, and purple, and the sea below looked tumultuous yet beautiful. It reminded her of where she was in her life, a moment of calm amidst the inevitable storm of change. As she stood there, lost in the painting, she was startled when someone gently touched her shoulder. "Hey, Mom," Ethan said, his voice warm. "What are you doing here?" Laura smiled, surprised and pleased. Ethan had been so busy lately, planning his future with Rachel, that she hadn't expected him to drop by. "I came to look at some art." "It's been a while since I had the chance," she replied, motioning to the painting. "This one caught my eye. It feels like it's speaking to me. Like standing at the edge of something big, yet not knowing what comes next." Ethan stood beside her, his eyes following hers to the painting. "I get it. I think we're both at that place right now. On the edge. Not sure what's next, but feeling like we're meant for something more." Laura nodded. She had always known that Ethan was destined for greatness, but hearing him say it made her proud in a way she couldn't quite explain. "I've been thinking a lot about that lately," she said, her voice quiet. "How much has changed? And how much we're both stepping into new versions of ourselves." Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of understanding. "You know, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Rachel and I were thinking about starting a family sooner than we had planned. We've been talking about buying a house and maybe even living closer to you. We want to be part of your life, Mom. We're ready to start this next chapter together, and we want you to be right there with us." Laura felt a lump form in her throat. She had always wanted to be there for Ethan and his family, but to hear that they were thinking of living closer, of making her part of their daily lives, brought tears to her eyes. "That sounds wonderful, Ethan," she said softly. "I'd love to be closer. I've missed seeing you both so much." For the first time in what felt like years, Laura realized how much she truly wanted to be a part of their world, not just as a mother, but as a grandmother, a friend, a witness to all of the beauty that was unfolding. The following days were filled with preparations for Ethan and Rachel's future. They toured houses together, looking for the perfect place to start their family. Laura wasn't entirely sure what her role was in all of this, but she was excited to be involved. It felt like they were all building something beautiful together, a shared future. One afternoon, while they were sitting around Ethan and Rachel's kitchen table, discussing the pros and cons of the different houses they had seen, Laura couldn't help but smile. She was no longer the woman who lived in the shadows of her son's life. She had stepped forward, embracing the change, and now she was a part of the exciting plans they were making for the future. "Rachel, do you mind if I ask a question?" Laura said, her voice tentative but sincere. "Of course," Rachel replied, looking up from the notepad in front of her. "I've been thinking about this for a while. As you and Ethan start your family, what kind of role do you see me playing in all of this? I want to be there for you, but I also want to respect your space. I don't want to overstep, but I'd love to be a part of your lives in any way I can." There was a brief silence before Rachel smiled, reaching out to take Laura's hand. "Laura, we want you to be a part of everything. I want you to be there when we have our kids. I want you to be the one who teaches them all the things you taught Ethan. You are family, and that's never going to change. You're going to be the most amazing grandmother." Laura felt the tears threatening again, but this time, they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of joy in knowing that she would be part of something bigger than herself. That her place in this world wasn't just defined by her role as a mother, but as someone who had created a legacy that would continue to grow. As Laura walked home that night, she felt lighter than she had in years. The path ahead of her wasn't clear, but for the first time, she didn't feel the need to have all the answers. She was learning to embrace the unknown, to trust that everything would fall into place. She had watched Ethan grow from a boy into a man, and now she was witnessing the beginning of his own family. This was the cycle of life, the moments of joy and sorrow, the challenges and triumphs. And Laura was grateful to be living in it all, no longer on the sidelines, but right at the heart of it. The following weeks flew by, each day blending into the next as Laura became more and more involved in Ethan and Rachel's plans for their future. They found a house not far from Laura's own home, a charming two-story with a garden out back, perfect for starting a family. Ethan and Rachel were thrilled, and Laura couldn't help but share in their excitement. Though Ethan had made it clear that he and Rachel wanted to live their own lives, Laura found herself reveling in the joy of being part of their journey. She would babysit for them when they needed a night out. She would be there when they needed advice. Though Ethan would never admit it, she could tell he valued her opinion. And most importantly, she would be there to see the family they were building grow, one step at a time. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Laura was sitting on her porch when she received a text message from Ethan. "Mom, we're coming over tonight to talk to you about something. It's important." A rush of emotions flooded through her. Was it good news or something troubling? The uncertainty hung in the air as she tried to focus on the text itself, but her mind raced. What could they possibly want to talk about? Her son had always been upfront with her, but this text felt different. She put her phone down and stood up, pacing around the porch, trying to calm the rising tension in her chest. Rachel and Ethan had always been communicative, but there was an unspoken weight to this message. Laura wasn't sure what she expected. Perhaps it was just her own nerves playing tricks on her. At exactly 6 o'clock, as promised, Ethan and Rachel arrived. Ethan gave her a quick hug, his face serious, while Rachel smiled softly, but there was a quiet tension in the way she held herself. "Hey, Mom," Ethan said, sitting down beside her. "We need to talk." Laura looked at them both carefully. The smiles were gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. "Of course. What's going on?" Ethan took a deep breath before he spoke. "It's about the house. We're having second thoughts. It's not about the house itself. This place is perfect for us. but we've been talking and we're feeling overwhelmed. It feels like there's a lot of pressure between the move, the wedding, starting a family. It's all happening so quickly, and we're just not sure we're ready for all of it." Rachel nodded in agreement. "We love the house, but we're wondering if we should slow down a bit, maybe take a step back. We don't want to rush into things, but at the same time, we don't want to regret not jumping in when we have the chance." Laura listened carefully, her heart aching for them. She could see the weight of the decision pressing down on both of them. Ethan had always been the kind of person who thrived on structure and planning, but even he seemed to be feeling the stress of balancing so many big life changes at once. "You know," Laura said softly, "it's okay to feel uncertain. Change is overwhelming, and sometimes the pressure of everything happening all at once can make you feel like you're drowning. But I'm so proud of both of you for recognizing this now before it becomes too much. You don't have to make any decisions right away. Take a step back. Find your footing. I'll be here for you no matter what." There was a pause, and then Ethan looked at her, his eyes softening. "Thanks, Mom. We really needed to hear that. We're just trying to figure out what feels right, and sometimes it's hard to trust ourselves." Rachel added, "I know it's a lot, but we both want the same things. It's just about figuring out the best way to move forward together." Laura smiled warmly at them both. "You don't have to have everything figured out right now. Life has a way of unfolding, and sometimes it's better to take it one step at a time. I'm confident that you'll both find your way." Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Rachel decided to take a break from their house hunting journey. They focused on their relationship, their wedding planning, and what it meant to start a family without the constant pressure of making immediate decisions about their future. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the right choice. They took time for long talks, quiet moments together, and the space to breathe. For Laura, it was a reminder that sometimes the best thing to do in times of uncertainty was to step back and give the space to let things settle. She knew that the best relationships weren't about rushing to the finish line. They were about finding balance, embracing the process, and trusting that things would fall into place when the time was right. One evening, as she sat on her porch again, watching the sun set over the horizon, she reflected on the journey she had been on. Ethan's life had been a series of milestones, each one taking him closer to the man he was destined to become. And though she had always been there, watching him grow, she was beginning to understand that her role in his life, his family's life, was evolving. In the past, she had been the one making decisions for him, guiding him along the way. But now, as he made his own choices, as he created a life with Rachel, Laura realized her role had shifted. She was still his mother, still his biggest supporter, but she had to learn to step back and let him lead the way. And in that process, she was learning to find her own path, to embrace the changes in her life, and to trust that there was still so much more ahead for her, too. One afternoon, Ethan and Rachel called her over for coffee. They had something to share, something they had been working on in the background. Laura walked into their home, ready for whatever news they had. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice full of warmth. "We've been thinking about things, and we've decided we want to move forward with the house after all. But we've also decided something else." Rachel smiled and took Ethan's hand. "We want you to be a part of this with us in every way. Not just as a grandmother, but as part of our family. We've made plans for a guest suite in the new house for you, and we want you to feel at home there. You're not just part of our past, Mom. You're part of our future." Laura felt tears spring to her eyes. This was the moment she had been waiting for, a full embrace of her place in Ethan and Rachel's world. "I'd love nothing more," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you both, and I can't wait for the future to unfold." In that moment, Laura realized that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the form of new beginnings, ones that invite you to be a part of something even bigger than yourself. The move into the new house came faster than Laura had expected, and soon she found herself standing in the heart of a home that no longer felt foreign. It was a house full of promise and potential, where Ethan and Rachel had already started to weave their lives together. Now, they had made space for her, too, both literally and figuratively. The guest suite was beautiful, tucked away in the back corner of the house. It was cozy and comfortable, with soft lighting, a small desk by the window, and an elegant bed covered in pale blues and grays. It felt like a sanctuary, just for her. As she unpacked her things and settled into the space, she couldn't help but think about how much had changed. This wasn't just a move for Ethan and Rachel, it was a move for their entire family, one that included her, too. Days turned into weeks, and Laura began to find a rhythm in the new house. Her mornings were spent with coffee in hand, sitting on the back porch while the sun rose over the garden. She loved this new, slower pace. She had always been so caught up in taking care of others, from Ethan to her own aging parents, that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply be. Here, in this new space, there was time to breathe, to reflect, and to look forward to what lay ahead. But things were not always as idyllic as they seemed. As much as she adored Ethan and Rachel, the adjustment to living under the same roof wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when Laura felt like a third wheel, times when she could sense the tension between them as they navigated the intricacies of married life, planning for a future that was still taking shape. One evening, as Rachel and Ethan were in the kitchen, discussing wedding plans, Laura found herself sitting quietly in the living room, sipping her tea. She was still getting used to having this much space, but there was a part of her that sometimes longed for her own independence, the freedom to come and go without needing to be a part of everything. When Ethan joined her a little while later, he sat beside her on the couch, his expression serious. "Mom," he said quietly, "I just wanted to check in with you. How are you feeling about everything? I know this is a big change." Laura smiled softly, her heart swelling with affection for him. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Really, I am. I've been loving spending more time with you both. The house is beautiful, and I feel so at home here. I'm just trying to get used to the idea that you're both starting your own lives, that this place isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us, together." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I get it. But I want you to know you're still a huge part of our lives. Just because we're making changes doesn't mean you're not still at the center of it all. We'll always need you, Mom. We're just trying to find our balance." Laura squeezed his hand, touched by his words. "I'm here, Ethan. I always will be. And I want you and Rachel to have your space, to make your decisions and live your lives. But you don't have to worry about me. I'm learning to find my way, too." There was a silence between them as Ethan processed her words. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer now. "I guess we're both learning to let go a little, huh?" Laura chuckled, nodding. "We sure are. But that's what life is about, isn't it? Letting go, even when it's hard." In the weeks that followed, Laura began to see the beauty in letting go. She saw it in the way Ethan and Rachel worked together, the way they laughed and argued and grew closer with every passing day. There were still moments of tension, of course, but they were finding their way, and Laura was learning to respect their journey, even when it felt like her own path was still unclear. One evening, as the three of them sat down to dinner, Ethan made a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To family, to love, and to learning how to live together." Rachel laughed, clinking her glass against his. "I think we're still figuring out the together part, but I love that we're doing it." Laura felt a warm smile stretch across her face. She was grateful for their openness, for their willingness to let her in, but also for the understanding that came with knowing when to step back. She was no longer in charge of their lives, but she didn't need to be. They were capable of standing on their own, just as she had learned to stand on her own in this new phase of her life. Days turned into months, and Ethan and Rachel began to settle into their new routine. Laura still played an active role in their lives, babysitting their dog on the weekends, helping with wedding plans, offering advice when asked. but she was also carving out time for herself. She reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies she had long forgotten, and even started volunteering at the local community center. As the seasons changed, so did she. Her role had shifted, and though it had been difficult at first, Laura began to understand that this was part of life's ebb and flow. It was all about balance. Sometimes that meant giving space to others. Sometimes it meant allowing herself to step forward and embrace new opportunities. One afternoon, as she sat on her porch, watching the sky turn pink as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan and Rachel came out to join her. "You've been so quiet lately, Mom," Ethan said, sitting beside her. "Is everything okay?" Laura smiled, her heart full. "Everything is more than okay, Ethan. I'm just enjoying the moment. I'm proud of everything we've built here, of everything you've done. I think I'm finally learning how to let go and let you both build the future you want. It's not always easy, but I know it's what's best for all of us." Rachel placed a hand on hers. "We're so lucky to have you, Laura. You've given us so much love and guidance, and we wouldn't be who we are without you." Laura felt the warmth of their words settle in her chest. This was her family, this was her future. And in their love and their growth, she was finding her own place, too. Not just as a mother, but as a woman who had her own dreams, her own passions, and a renewed sense of purpose. The months continued to flow by, each one a mixture of joyful moments and quiet reflections for Laura. As she stood at the edge of the kitchen counter one evening, preparing dinner for Ethan and Rachel, she found herself lost in thought. Ethan and Rachel were doing so well, and though it had taken some time for her to adjust, she was finally beginning to embrace this next chapter of her life. The changes hadn't come without difficulty, but she had learned something valuable over the past few months, the true power of letting go. It wasn't just about Ethan and Rachel creating their own space and life, it was about her doing the same for herself. It was about releasing the notion that she had to be the one to make all the decisions, that she had to be the one who always held everything together. In doing so, she had given herself the freedom to explore her own desires, to take a step back from the role she had held for so long as the anchor of the family. One Saturday morning, Laura was sitting in her favorite chair by the window, a cup of coffee cradled in her hands, when Rachel came in, looking both excited and nervous. "Good morning." Rachel greeted her, sitting down beside her on the couch. "I wanted to talk to you about something. It's kind of important." Laura set her cup down, her curiosity piqued. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Rachel took a deep breath before speaking. "Ethan and I have been talking, and we think it's time to take the next step. We're ready to start a family. We've been planning for a while, and we wanted to ask for your opinion. We're thinking about getting pregnant soon, but we wanted to talk to you first." Laura felt a rush of emotions flood her, excitement, a bit of nervousness, and even a sense of pride. It wasn't that she didn't want Ethan and Rachel to have children. In fact, she had always hoped they would one day build a family of their own. But hearing it out loud, hearing Rachel say it so matter-of-factly, made it all the more real. Her son and his wife were about to take on the biggest role of their lives, becoming parents. "That's wonderful news, Rachel," Laura said softly, her voice full of warmth. "I know how much you both want this. And I think you'll make amazing parents." Rachel smiled, but Laura could see the uncertainty lingering in her eyes. "We want to be ready for this. It's a huge decision, and I know there will be challenges, but we're hoping you'll be there to support us, like you always have." "Of course, sweetheart," Laura replied immediately, squeezing her hand. "I'll be here every step of the way, as always." As the weeks passed, Ethan and Rachel began to prepare for the possibility of starting a family. They took parenting classes, researched everything from baby names to birthing plans, and talked endlessly about their future. And while Laura was more than willing to offer advice when they asked for it, she also knew that this was their journey. It was their time to build a family, to create their own traditions, and to navigate parenthood in their own way. There was one moment, in particular, that stood out to Laura. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Ethan and Rachel were sitting in the living room, discussing their plans for the next few months. Laura was in the kitchen, making lunch, when she overheard them talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. Their voices were filled with excitement, and Laura couldn't help but smile to herself. For so long, she had been the one to hold everything together. Whether it was Ethan's school projects, career choices, or relationship struggles, she had always been the one to offer support, advice, and solutions. But as she listened to them now, she realized something profound. They didn't need her in the same way anymore. Of course, they still valued her wisdom, still relied on her presence, but they were no longer dependent on her. They were strong, capable, and ready to create their own future. Laura had spent so many years trying to ensure that everything was perfect for Ethan, that she had never truly given herself permission to let go, to let him go. But now, as she stood there in the kitchen, hearing Ethan and Rachel plan their future, she knew it was time. One evening, as Ethan and Rachel sat down to dinner, Laura felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had been so wrapped up in her own fears about losing her place in their lives, about no longer being the central figure in their story. But the truth was, she hadn't lost anything. Instead, she had gained so much more. After dinner, as the dishes were cleared away, Laura stood up and made her way to the living room. She had something important to say. Ethan and Rachel followed her, both curious. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Laura began, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "About all the changes that have been happening, about my role in your lives, about the way I've been holding on to certain things. I realized something. I've spent so much time worrying about what it would be like when you both started your own lives, when you became parents, when you didn't need me in the same way anymore. But the truth is, I don't have to hold on to you in that way. I don't have to control everything or always be the one to have the answers." She paused, meeting their eyes. "You've both grown so much, and I'm proud of you. Proud of the way you're building a life together. I don't want you to feel like you have to rely on me for everything. I'll always be here for you, but I also want you to know that it's okay for me to step back sometimes. It's okay for me to let go." There was a long silence before Ethan spoke, his voice soft. "Mom, we've always needed you. And we always will. But we also know that we can stand on our own, just like you've taught us. You don't have to carry everything for us anymore. You've done more than enough." Rachel nodded. "And you've done it with so much love. But now it's time for us to create our own way, to build our family. We don't need you to hold us up anymore. We need you to be a part of it, just as you've always been. And we'll always make room for you." Laura felt a deep sense of peace settle in her chest. She had feared this moment, had feared that in letting go, she would lose something precious. But instead, she realized that letting go had freed her to experience something deeper. A new, more evolved relationship with Ethan and Rachel, one that allowed them both to grow while still keeping her close. As the evening ended and Ethan and Rachel headed to bed, Laura stayed behind, sitting in the quiet of the living room. She smiled softly to herself, reflecting on the conversation. Letting go didn't mean losing her place in their lives. It meant that she could continue to be a part of their future in a new way. She had given them the gift of independence, but they had given her something even more valuable, the gift of freedom. She no longer needed to carry everything on her own. She had done her part, and now it was time for Ethan and Rachel to carry their own weight. And in doing so, they were making space for her to stand beside them as equals, not just as a mother, but as someone who had learned the art of letting go and embracing what came next. The morning sun streamed gently through the kitchen window, casting soft rays across the countertop. Laura stood there, stirring her coffee, her mind racing with the thoughts of everything that had happened over the past few months. She had let go of control, of expectations, and most importantly, of the fear that had once kept her from embracing the changes in her life. Now, in this quiet moment, she could finally feel the weight of everything settling into place. She was not just a mother or a caregiver anymore. She was something more. Something entirely new. The house had transformed since the time she first moved in with Ethan and Rachel. The rooms now seemed brighter, warmer. The laughter of their everyday lives echoed in the halls, reminding Laura that this was a home full of love, possibility, and growth. Every corner she walked through held a memory, a sign of their shared experiences and the journey they had been on together. But there was also a shift happening within her own heart, one that couldn't be ignored. The realization that she had stepped into a new phase of her life, one where she no longer defined herself solely through motherhood, had been both liberating and daunting. It was as though she had stepped into a world where anything was possible, where she could rediscover her own voice and purpose. It wasn't until one particular afternoon, however, that Laura truly felt the impact of this shift. She had been spending more time with Rachel, especially as the months wore on and Ethan began to focus on his career more intensely. Rachel had been a constant source of support, her warmth and understanding creating a bond that felt unbreakable. The two of them had begun to spend afternoons together, talking about everything from books to the possibility of starting a family. Today, as they sat in the cozy living room sipping tea, Rachel turned to Laura, her expression more serious than usual. "Laura," she began, her voice hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about something. You've always been there for Ethan and me, through every decision, every joy, every hard time. And I can't help but feel like there's something you're still not giving yourself credit for." Laura raised an eyebrow, a little surprised by the direction the conversation was taking. "What do you mean?" Rachel smiled softly, leaning forward, her eyes filled with genuine affection. "You've been so selfless all these years. You've given so much of yourself to us. But now, I think it's time for you to give something to yourself. You've raised an incredible son. You've loved with everything you have. But you deserve to love yourself the same way. I think it's time for you to take your own journey now. Whether that's traveling, pursuing a dream you've had, or simply finding time to explore what makes you happy outside of being a mother." Laura sat back, stunned by Rachel's words. It was something she had been thinking about in passing, but hearing it out loud, coming from Rachel, someone who had only been a part of her life for a few years, felt like an awakening. It was like a door opening in her mind, a door she hadn't realized was closed. "I've never really thought about it that way," Laura admitted, her voice shaky. "I've always put my own dreams aside to focus on everyone else. I've never really known what it would feel like to put myself first." Rachel reached across the table, gently placing her hand on Laura's. "And now's your time. You don't have to do everything for us anymore. We've got our own path, and now you get to carve out yours." There was a pause between them, a moment of understanding. Laura couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over her. Rachel was right. It was time. Time for her to stop holding on to the past and embrace what the future could be. That evening, as Ethan and Rachel were finishing dinner, Laura stood up, a sudden determination filling her chest. She needed to do something for herself, something that would honor her own journey. Ethan noticed the change in her demeanor as soon as she stood, her body language open, yet powerful. "I've been thinking about something," Laura said, her voice steady but filled with excitement. "I've decided to take a trip. I want to travel, to see the places I've always dreamed of seeing. I want to reconnect with myself, with the parts of me I've left behind in the years of raising you and making sure everyone else was okay." Ethan looked at her, a smile crossing his face as he heard the conviction in her voice. "Mom, that's amazing. You've more than earned it. What kind of trip are you thinking about?" "Europe," Laura said with a smile. "I've always wanted to see Paris, walk the streets of Rome, and maybe even hike in the Swiss Alps. It's time for me to finally do something for me." Rachel beamed at her, her voice full of encouragement. "You'll love it, Laura. And we're so proud of you. It's been a long time coming, but you deserve it." The days leading up to her departure were filled with excitement and anticipation. Laura took her time researching destinations, reading travel blogs, and preparing for the journey. It wasn't just about visiting new places. It was about rediscovering who she was outside of the roles of mother, daughter, and caregiver. She packed her bags with a sense of purpose, determined to explore, to embrace every moment, and to return with a renewed sense of herself. She knew this trip was a symbol of her transformation, a way to mark the beginning of the next chapter in her life. As the day of her departure arrived, Ethan and Rachel came to the airport to see her off. There were hugs, tears, and promises to stay in touch. Laura felt a sense of pride, knowing that they were supporting her in a way that felt right. It was no longer about holding on to the past, but about giving herself permission to step into the future. She boarded the plane with a heart full of excitement, her eyes set on the horizon. She didn't know exactly what awaited her, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready. Ready to discover new places, to meet new people, and most importantly, to meet the woman she had always been beneath the roles she had played. In the months that followed, Laura traveled across Europe, each destination bringing a new adventure. She wandered through the art galleries of Paris, dined in the charming cafes of Rome, and trekked the rugged mountains of Switzerland. With every step, she shed the layers of doubt and fear that had once held her back, embracing the freedom that came with living fully in the present. When she returned, she was a different person, a woman who had found herself again, a woman who had allowed herself to let go and truly live. And when she walked through the door of Ethan and Rachel's home, she was met with open arms, with love, and with the realization that this new beginning wasn't just about traveling. It was about creating a life that was all her own. She had learned the most valuable lesson of all. In order to love others fully, she had to love herself first. And in doing so, she had found the peace and fulfillment she had long been searching for. Laura's journey wasn't just about the physical places she visited. It was about the emotional and spiritual journey she had undertaken. She had stepped into a new chapter of her life, one that was filled with endless possibilities. This was just the beginning. And so, she smiled, knowing that the best was yet to come. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?